The Rhineland town of Biblis is home to 2 of Germany's nuclear reactors. Shut down in the wake of the Fukushima disaster, they will eventually be dismantled. That process, which has already begun at other plants, is not only dangerous, but expensive. It is expected to cost around €1 billion to deconstruct each site, and no one knows what will happen to highly radioactive components. The plant's operators want a state foundation to assume part of the risk.
The idea of a foundation first appeared in the media about 1.5 years ago, and it's now gained fresh wind. We have a situation in which energy companies are responsible for the operation and dismantling of the plants, while the state assumes responsibility for final storage.
That idea is highly controversial. And, in fact, energy companies would prefer the state to take over the highly subsidized power stations completely. That's unlikely. Neither the government nor opposition parties are ready to let them off the hook.
There's a clear legal ruling which states that power plant operators are responsible for disposal. That is the law, and it should be treated as such.
I think power station operators ought to be the ones paying to have them dismantled.
Just because there were generous subsidies at the beginning, it doesn't mean the public hand should also finance the expensive end.
There are still 17 nuclear power stations in Germany. Merkel's government had just extended their lifespan when the Fukushima disaster struck. The catastrophe led to the immediate closure of 8 reactors and the decision to make Germany a nuclear-free zone by 2022. Now the country is investing even more heavily in renewable energy sources, such as solar, wind and biogas. The shift has put nuclear energy companies at a disadvantage.
These companies are really struggling at the moment. Firstly, because they've lost income from the decommissioned plants, but also because giving priority to renewables means they're no longer as profitable as they once were. That makes the situation difficult for a lot of companies.
So how are they going to take on the challenge of dismantling the power stations? They have earmarked €36 billion for the job, at least in theory. But it's unclear whether the money will be available when it is needed.
Something has to happen. We have to find a safe way because we can't expect the taxpayer to cover all the costs. But we also can't wait until a company just goes bust. Something has to happen in the meantime.
There's a risk the taxpayer will end up having to pay the disposal cost and for the running of a permanent storage facility. That's a risk we have to take seriously. But it can't mean that we let these companies off right from the start.
Nuclear power has never really been a big business risk. Back in the 1960s, when politicians were keen to put Germany on the nuclear map, the first test reactor near Frankfurt am Main was built with millions in public money. There was a kind of nuclear euphoria, and even a nuclear minister, Franz Josef Strauß. A second boom came with the oil crisis of the 1970s. That's why power companies now say they never wanted nuclear energy.
Back then, politicians wanted nuclear power, and there was a nuclear power minister. The relatively small power companies weren't really interested in the technology, but there was the political will and a major social consensus to have nuclear power. So there was shared responsibility.
Shared, but not very fairly. To date, the German taxpayer has invested some €200 billion in nuclear power. Once that is factored in, it doesn't look like the cheap source of fuel it is believed to be. And it will get worse when a decision is made on the final storage site. Currently, waste is only stored in temporary facilities. So can energy companies really back out of their responsibility?
I don't understand the crocodile tears these companies are shedding. They've benefited from nuclear power for decades. They've made billions in profits, and they were fully aware of their legal obligations. They got tax breaks for this deconstruction, and they're therefore obliged to fulfill these legal obligations.
One way or the other, Germany's citizens will foot the bill, either through the tax office or in higher costs for energy.